So it is this debate again. Are Linux distros mishandling the software they distribute through their modifications and packages? Now this time it is Linux Mint versus the calendar app that they ship. But this issue goes much deeper than this, and my opinion on the matter is clear. So we'll talk about the actual problem, Linux Mint versus the calendar app that they ship, why this is actually a much bigger issue than just that. And to be clear, this will not be Flatpak propaganda as you might have expected. I will not talk about packaging formats here, it's just on the distro packaging and distribution model that clearly no longer really works. So let's talk about this. You know where all the usual YouTube buttons and comment section are, so you can click on them, and we'll start, of course, with this message from our sponsor. So this video is sponsored by TuxCare. They are your provider of all solutions to ensure your open source stack stays secure, up to date, and compliant with security obligations for as long as needed. They offer specifically rebootless kernel patching. In today's climate of new CVEs emerging weekly with new AI tools detecting and weaponizing more and more vulnerabilities that went unnoticed, sometimes for years, the ability to keep your Linux system safe without having to schedule downtime is invaluable, and that's what TuxCare gives you. You'll be able to apply patches without a reboot, so you don't have any maintenance windows to plan around, your compliance obligations are ensured, and vulnerabilities are fixed as soon as the patch is available, not on your next maintenance window. Oh, and of course, this helps you save on costs too. Rebootless patching works on Red Hat, Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, Debian, Oracle Linux, Ubuntu, CentOS, and more, and you can even extend that coverage to shared system libraries like OpenSSL and glibc or ARM-based IoT devices. As usual, you can learn more by clicking the link in the description. So, distros, theming, changing, tweaking apps, and app developers being unhappy about it, this is not a new issue. So what started this flame war again? So, Linux Mint is known for basing its work on LTS releases of Ubuntu or on Debian in the case of LMDE, which obviously both come with older packages. This means plenty of applications that Mint pre-installs are older versions of what exists out there. And some of these applications are GNOME Calendar, the System Monitor, the Calculator, the Archive Manager, and others. For a while, Mint shipped GTK3 versions of most of these applications that they had taken from GNOME, even though those apps had moved to GTK4. For example, GNOME Calendar moved to GTK4 with GNOME 42 in 2022, so 4 years ago. For a long while, the calendar version that Mint users got was outdated by 6 to 8 versions of GNOME. Now, why in Torvald's name would you want to do that? You might ask. That is insane. It would be like releasing a brand new software solution based on Android 13 instead of the Android 17 version that just released. And that's what Waydroid does. Yeah, that's bad. Now, the reason for Mint's decision was that they did not want to move to GTK4 and libadwaita, because libadwaita, the GNOME theming platform, does not work with Mint's own guidelines. Those applications did not look right next to other Mint apps, they didn't use the same window controls, and Mint felt it provided a bad user experience. Which it did, to be clear, having apps shipped by default by your distro, some that look gray, some that look blue, some that look green, it's not a good user experience for people, and they had to do something about it. Ultimately, Mint realized that they could not maintain GTK3 versions of these apps for much longer, so they moved to the GTK4 and libadwaita version of some of those applications, but they applied on top of that something called libadapta, which is basically a way to make libadwaita apps look like they belong in Mint a bit more. They use the right colors, the right window controls, some symbolic icons, and some UI tints and elements are much closer to the other apps that Mint ships. And so, what is the problem? Well, first, libadapta, the compatibility layer, basically, that Mint uses to theme these apps, it is outdated compared to recent versions of libadwaita. This means if you started shipping the actual modern recent version of a libadwaita app, like GNOME Calendar, it would very likely be utterly broken by libadapta because libadapta does not have all the components that the GNOME Calendar would use. Which means that they can't ship the latest version of GNOME Calendar, and currently what they're shipping is version 46, when the oldest supported version is 49. So there are 3 GNOME versions behind on that application. Second, what they ship is no longer GNOME Calendar. It is GNOME Calendar with libadapta, which is not the same experience and application as what the GNOME Calendar developers want to ship. This would not be an issue if what Mint shipped was called Mint Calendar or anything else. But currently it is called GNOME Calendar. All the support links that they have in the About page points to GNOME Calendar's bug tracker. It uses the GNOME Calendar name. It is basically, for every user of Mint, GNOME Calendar, which means when a user encounters issues, they call onto the GNOME Calendar developers, even if said issues are linked to Mint's changes. Not just visual problems, but actual bugs or missing features. This also encompasses social media requests and posts that are sent to the official app's developers. GNOME Calendar's devs have multiple examples of this, which obviously makes them lose time, lose energy, and creates unnecessary work for people who are volunteers. And also, there's the image problem. Users that use those old versions of GNOME Calendar on Mint don't know they're not using the latest one, so they will think the app is garbage or buggy or looks weird or doesn't do stuff in the right way, even though all those issues have been fixed and might have been fixed for years now. You can see this specific message that is relatively recent and shows someone relying on GNOME Calendar 41, which is insanely old, and that's what the GNOME Calendar devs told them. Yes, this feature exists, you just don't have it because you're using a super old version. So that's the gist of the issue, but why the flame war specifically? GNOME Calendar developers opened a GitLab issue to ask the Mint devs to remove the support links to the GNOME Calendar issue tracker, because at that point, they can't do anything about the problems that they will receive, because those problems are already fixed. Unless Mint updates their app, then they can't do anything. They also asked Mint to update the branding to reflect the fact that what they're shipping is no longer GNOME Calendar, it is an old version of it that is no longer supported. This issue stayed open for 6 months before they got a response, and that was only after another GNOME developer, Jeff Fortin, started asking again. Mint's response was reasonable. They said that what they ship is provided by Ubuntu LTS and Debian Stable. They just don't change the versions from that, and that felt okay to them. Calendar developers said that these versions are massively behind. The currently supported versions are 50 and 49, when Mint currently ships 46 and 48. Mint's response was that their changes are minimal compared to the version in Debian and Ubuntu's repos, and as such they don't see a need to fix anything, and they asked Mint to talk to Debian or Ubuntu so that they would update their own calendar versions. The developer's response was that most unactionable issues that get opened against GNOME Calendar don't come from Debian or Ubuntu, they come from Linux Mint users, because those other distros just don't really theme the app, they don't apply themes or change anything, they conform to the official look and feel, so they don't tend to break stuff as often. Which, to be fair, might be the case for GNOME Calendar, but Ubuntu's very own theme has been known to completely destroy certain GNOME features or certain GNOME applications, so it's probably just luck that Ubuntu doesn't destroy Calendar, because it destroys a lot of other things, or at least it used to. From there, basically the conversation devolved into not my problem versus please fix that garbage, and nothing really happened, and the issue was closed by Mint's lead Clément Lefebvre 2 months ago, which prompted a GNOME Calendar developer to just open a big blog post explaining why this was such a problem. So these are the facts. Distributions, Mint included, tend to hold back versions of graphical apps and graphical desktops to just ship one and stick with it, which results in very outdated, sometimes modified versions of apps being put in the hands of users which don't understand that some bugs have been fixed since this version was published, that they're not using the latest one, and that the versions they use might have been heavily modified, resulting in bugs that the upstream developers cannot fix. Now let's see why I personally think this is a major issue for every Linux application. So first, distributions have a right to do that, to keep shipping very old versions and call them the name of the official application. Licensing wise, as long as it's all free software and there are no weird trademarks, they can use older code and package it and never update it and still call it GNOME Calendar, System Monitor, or whatever the official application's name is. It is allowed, it is free software, but being allowed doesn't mean it's right to do it. Tomorrow, I could create a Linux distro that ships Thunderbird 1, Firefox 1, and GNOME 1, and have support links pointing to the current versions of these projects. I can do it, it doesn't mean it would be good for those projects to receive the bug reports on those outdated versions. Now, to have a less extreme example, 2 years in Linux time is a very, very long time. Some applications and desktops have changed immensely in 2 years. That is the case for GNOME Calendar specifically, which has received enormous UI widget changes, fluidity changes, feature improvements, and also accessibility improvements. 2 years is a lot of work that the developers put into this, and shipping an outdated version of that, even though you have the right to do it, is not really reflective of the quantity and quality of the work that has been invested in said app. So yes, the license technically makes you right, but the timeless The Big Lebowski movie has a quote about people who are not technically wrong. Now, something not many people know is that applications, graphical apps, also have end-of-life versions and they have supported versions. Most distributions respect the end-of-life problems with the Linux kernel, with drivers, with systemd, and other things. They tend to update to not be on an end-of-life version, or if they can't move away, they tend to backport fixes. But generally, fixed version distros do not do the same with applications. They will stick with an end-of-life version and they won't backport fixes and they won't update them and they will just leave their users with that. Now, if you think the GNOME Calendar developers were maybe, I don't know, too aggressive or maybe are making too many demands out of distros, imagine if it was another project. If it was, I don't know, Linus Torvalds coming on into Linux Mint's bugs tracker and telling them, hey, you're still shipping end-of-life kernels and we're getting bug reports for stuff we already fixed. Many people would take the side of Torvalds in this story, and I think the same courtesy needs to be extended to applications as well. They have supported versions, you ship the supported versions, not the end-of-life ones. And I'm already seeing the comments, but Nick, distributions want to theme, they want to modify, they want to tweak software, and yes, they do, and it's good that they want to do that. I am all for that. I don't like that GNOME applications are locked to libadwaita and that single theme and that it is hard as hell to theme them without breaking them. I don't think this is respectful for users either. It is a move made for developers, not for users. It doesn't satisfy both ends of the equation here. It has positives, but it is also very annoying. If a distro wants to patch in support for the global menu, for a specific cloud provider, or for a system tray icon, for a theme, for a missing feature, for whatever, I like that. I want that on distros. But at that point, it is no longer the official application. You changed it, you modified it. No matter the size of the modification, it is no longer the product the original app developers made. You have a right, sometimes, to keep the branding. It doesn't mean that you should. You should make your own version of it. If I buy a cake from a renowned baker and I draw a badly made Tux logo on it and then sell that cake as if it was made by the baker, that's not right. It is no longer the baker's cake. I added my own touch on it. I'm selling it as my own cake. If you sell a version of Skyrim with 20 weirdo nude mods pre-installed, you can't call it Skyrim. Not legally, but if you could legally, you wouldn't call it Skyrim. It is no longer Skyrim. So if you want your own look and feel, if you want your own version of an app, then you make your own. You fork it and you maintain it and you call it something different. Betterbird doesn't call themselves Thunderbird. LibreWolf doesn't ship with the Firefox icon. CachyOS doesn't call itself Arch Linux. When you make a derivative, you change the name. It is just good practice. And if the change you want to apply is just maintaining a very old version of software that you don't want to update, then at that point, it is also no longer the software that these developers are making, and you should change the name and the icon too. It's a Theseus' ship situation. You are the old ship of Theseus, and the developers change so many things that what they have is no longer the old one. Except they own the name and you don't, so you are the one changing the name of the boat. Now, the second issue is, of course, users. Users lose out when you don't give them the latest version of an application, or at least a relatively recent one. You're giving them an old version of an app that is not the best version they could have access to. You intentionally decided that your convenience as a distro or your preferred user experience was to give users an inferior, older version of something that they will likely use every day. The debate here is around the calendar, but Mint also does it for the system monitor, for the video player, for the disk scanner, for the paper scanner tool, for the archive manager. Every time these applications fix an issue or add a feature, Mint will not have that for multiple years. And sure, those are relatively simple, small apps that you might not expect to grow and move often, but if you apply the same logic to a web browser, for example, which, by the way, Mint does update with every new update, then you see the problem. The size or complexity of the application doesn't matter here. It's a matter of respect for your users and also for the developers of said applications. And let me be clear, I'm not singling out Linux Mint here. This is not an attack on Mint specifically. It is an attack on the general Linux distro stable model. Every distro that doesn't update things regularly, at least to the oldest supported version, is in the wrong here. In the case of GNOME Calendar, you'll have users seeing that name, GNOME Calendar, and then have their online accounts not working, broken UIs, trying to export an event to an ICS file and that not working, or encountering specific bugs. They are going to think that this application is bad, is broken, and is incompetent. But the supported version of said app does not have these problems. The developers actually worked to fix this. They spent their volunteer time on making things better, and the distro decided that their theme or their UI preferences or their build pipeline was more important than the application developers' work. And that is not good. That is disrespectful for your users, that is disrespectful for application developers, and this strongly reinforces the image that Linux is bad and broken and annoying because people will use distros that ship old versions of software that don't reflect the current state of an actual modern Linux distro. Again, not specifically attacking Mint here because Mint derives most of their packages from Ubuntu LTS or Debian. This is also a Debian problem and an Ubuntu LTS problem. They are equally as guilty as Mint here. Now, there might be an argument that Linux offers plenty of choice in terms of distros. If, as a user, you don't want to use those end-of-life unsupported apps, then you can use a distro that does these updates, either a rolling release or something like Fedora, which doesn't really have LTS versions where you will get a new version every 6 months. You could do that. The problem is Mint, Ubuntu, Debian, the distros that tend to stick with very old software, those are the ones people jump to first because those are the big names. Those are the ones that people know. Those are the ones that tend to be recommended quite a lot to new Linux users, including, for example, by myself. So I'm as guilty as anyone here. And so users that don't really know better, that don't really know how packaging works, how distro models function, they will just use stuff that is extremely old and they will want to be helpful and report bugs. And in doing so, they will probably just create more work that is wholly unnecessary in most cases because those bugs don't exist anymore. This leads us to the third problem. App developers, they get the very short end of that stick here. Issue trackers are already being swarmed with crappy AI slop reports. You also don't want to have to deal with human-generated reports that talk about bugs that you fixed 2 years ago, or that don't even exist in the application itself because the bug comes from the theme, from the packaging of the app on the distro, or for the packaging of its dependencies on that distro. Now, it might surprise you to learn this, but application developers are actually human beings, and they tend to have some amount of feelings, just like human beings. And so when they see the same comment 5 to 10 times per week, telling them that what they built is garbage, and then when they look into it, they realize it's because somebody made a garbage package out of what they built, then they tend to get short-tempered, maybe a little bit angry. And then people wonder, oh, why are these app developers so angry, so mean to me? I didn't do anything. It's because you're the 10th person this day to report something that they have no control over and that they already spent their time fixing. Distros that choose to ship outdated versions of software intentionally make the application developers worse. You might not have thought about it, but at the moment the developer tells you, hey, this is starting to make our lives difficult, please update your version. If you refuse to do it, then you're intentionally making their lives worse. And I know that some distros already have messages in their welcome tours or in their installers telling users, if you find a bug, report it to us first and we'll dispatch those to the relevant application developers. Problem is, this is not persistent throughout applications. Users, when they use Linux Mint, when they use Ubuntu, if they look at the application that feels buggy to them, that doesn't work properly, they are not going to think about reporting that to the distro, because when they go to the About page, it says GNOME Calendar, it says LibreOffice, it says Firefox. They don't know that this might have been a modified package, they don't know if it's outdated or not, they just see a link called Report an Issue, and when they click it, it takes them to the GitLab or GitHub tracker of the application developers, not to the distro. This is the issue. People don't know, they will not remember that you told them to report to the distro first because that was a one-time message, it is not displayed in the applications themselves, so if you don't ship a supported version, do not direct users to report issues to the application developers because they can't do anything about it. Now, what's even more annoying is that distros already offer that consideration to certain projects of not shipping outdated and unsupported software. The famed stable system made of carefully curated dependencies, drivers, kernel versions, it works because generally distros use supported versions of these kernels, drivers, and whatever else. When the kernel that a distribution ships goes end of life, they tend to either move to a newer supported kernel or they start backporting patches to the old version. It's the same with drivers generally and plenty of parts in the software stack of a distro. Apparently, applications are not worthy of that same consideration. Or at least some apps aren't, because for example, web browsers do get updates very regularly, but plenty of other apps do not. Now, I know it is difficult to update an application to a new version. You have to update the app, the libraries, the frameworks underneath, the dependencies, and then all the other apps that depend on that and whatever. It is a cascading effect. And the argument that my stable system is worth more than the few features and the few bug fixes that I would get moving 2 or 3 or 4 versions ahead, I don't subscribe to that at all. You have rolling releases that are insanely stable, OpenSUSE Slow Roll being an example, Tumbleweed as well. Those are pretty rock solid and they don't hold back on updates for 4 years. So there is a way to do those updates. I would also usually slot in my Flatpak propaganda here, which obviously solves all those dependency issues, but I said I wouldn't, so I won't. Now, my opinion is that the distro packaging model needs to evolve. Currently, it harms users and it also harms app developers. Distros exist to distribute software. Some do that really well, some do that relatively badly, at least when it comes to the applications. But in 2026, it is no longer acceptable to have distros ship apps that are fully out of date without even warning the user that the version that they're using is extremely outdated. If you want your carefully constructed, stable system, that's awesome. Do that. Update it, manage it, backport stuff to it. That's fantastic. I love seeing distros with that amount of effort put in. But do extend the same consideration to your graphical applications. Just because it's an app, not a full kernel, doesn't mean there hasn't been a lot of work put in it. They deserve the same attention to detail. And if you don't want to backport fixes, if you want to keep your very old unsupported version with all its bugs and its missing features, rename it, change the logo, change the support links to your issue tracker. You will forward the bugs that are still relevant. You will do the triage for stuff that you need to backport. You handle it. It's no longer the official project. It is your own. Rename it and handle it this way. My main point is that I'm not criticizing distros for being terrible or bad or not using the right packaging format. I'm criticizing them for not reflecting the current quality of the software that users think they have. Users see GNOME Calendar, they think it's terrible because they use a version 8 years old. That's not normal, because the current version is great. So, two solutions for distros. Either you update to, at the very least, the oldest still supported version of the app. Plenty of developers will have cutoffs like that. You update to at least that, please, so that your users have a decent experience. And if you really don't want to do that in the name of stability or whatever else, then you just rename the app and you make it clear to your users that they are not using the latest version of that, because they're making the wrong opinions and they're starting to think that these apps are terrible, even though the problems they have with them are fixed and have been for like 4 years. It seems like the decent thing to do to me, but you let me know down there in the comments if you agree. And in the meantime, I'll leave you in the capable hands of this guy telling you about our sponsor, Tuxedo Computers. Tuxedo makes laptops and desktops that ship with Linux pre-installed. They are based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world. And of course, they have devices that are made to run Linux specifically, from the smallest, more affordable laptops all the way up to giant gaming towers or gaming laptops. Plenty of stuff in between. You have tons of options for the keyboard layouts, for the components and everything else. I only use their devices to do everything that you see, hear, read, or whatever else from me. And they're great. So as usual, the link is down in the description. If you need a new computer, do give them a shot. They're really fantastic. Anyway, this will conclude today's video. I'm always happy to talk like nicely and politely about this in the comments. You have all the usual YouTube buttons, the subscribe button, the bell, you know, whatever, all those cheaty things that YouTube does. You can click them, please, because that really helps the channel. And of course, there are plenty of links in the description, which you can also click if you want. Thank you all for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one, well, for the next news video, I guess. Bye!